Okay, so that's all fine and dandy, everything that I said, but we really need to understand how Weber thinks that different types of values, or even a specific particular value, how exactly it affects the way that people go about their lives, okay? So Weber introduced this incredible, wonderful metaphor, one of my favorites in all of sociology. It's called the switchman metaphor. Now, most of us in the United States don't ride trains. We might not have any idea what the switchman means. So, lucky you, I took a moment here and tried my absolute best at drawing, which you see is not nearly enough to ever get me on drawing the next American Idol for future artists. So in Weber's view of how the world works, he argues that basically, like a good sociologist, that a lot of the social world is driven by interest. And what he meant by that was a lot of what happens in society is driven by economics and politics in a broad, generic sense. And so those things, economic and politics, are strong, they have momentum, and there's very little we can do to easily kind of shift the direction that they go in society. And we know that because change is hard, right? The Occupy Wall Street movement ran into that last fall. You know, terrific ideas, some great energy, but it's really difficult to make any sort of drastic social change. So in Weber's view of how society works, we have this train chugging down the tracks, right? Chugga, 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 choo, choo. And then the switchman. Now, a switchman, just so you know, the way a train works, right, is a train can keep going on this track here, or if you flip a switch right here, it can go down this other track. And back in the good old days, before electronics could make all this automatic, there used to be literally a switchman there. A little guy, and it was usually a guy, he would have like a flag, which would show to the train that he's switching the train, and then he would literally flip a switch on right here, and it would send the train down this other track here. Now this is the important part. For Weber, ideas, so new ideas, are a switchman. They can literally redirect the way that politics and economics are going chugging down the tracks of society. So if an idea, for whatever reason, is kind of strong enough to kind of change the way people think about the world, change institutions, set up new institutions, cause new behaviors, then it sends the regular interests of politics and economics down this track. These things still are the main drivers of society, but the way they actually look and the way they're actually done through kind of the motives and intents of individuals becomes very different. And what's important here is the ideas create this switch, but as we've said with our value rational action, over here at the end of the line, basically, in Weber's argument, is this kind of new value that is orienting that this idea switches the train towards. So that's the important part about that. These ideas have embedded in them a conception, a goal, a telos, an end, which the train gets switched going towards. So our action begins to be oriented towards a new goal or a new end. Hold on one second, I gotta set my YouTube timer here. I often forget to do this since these have to be 15-minute slots. So the classic example of this for Weber is a book that he wrote that you can literally still get today on Amazon. They sell all sorts of versions of it. It's called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Now that might sound like a lame title, but that's an incredibly important title. And let me say a couple things about that. First, if you've ever heard the phrase work ethic, that's where this book is where that phrase comes from. Because Weber argues in this that a very particular ethic, which is a way of life for Weber. An ethic is a way of life of approaching that goal. So it's a particular way that this theoretical idea of value rational action happens. There's different, people could have different end products, different values, or I'm sorry, not end products, but end goals, different values, and this whole process is called value rational action. But at any given society or any given historical moment, an example of value rational action, Weber would call an ethic, kind of a way of life. So this is kind of radical, right? So Weber writes this book, I believe it's in the early 1900s, but by that point we've had like 60 years of Marxist critique of capitalism. And Marx, if you know anything about Marx, Marx is looking at the driving forces of capitalism as based in conflict between those who produce, those who have their labor, in Marx's term, alienated, the value of their labor taken away, and capitalists who have capital by which to have power over that labor. But Weber says, well, actually, if you look at the way that capitalism seems to have arisen in Northern Europe in the 16 and 1700s, it sure seems that there's, within individual participants in a capitalist economy, it seems that they have some sort of ethic, they have some sort of way of going about doing life that isn't quite the story how Marx told it. So Weber is bringing that interpretive kind of focus of sociology that we talked about before, and he's zoning in on this thing we call capitalism, and he wants to know, well, how is it that these individual capitalists do their thing? So that's very Weber, right? Methodological individualism. He says if there's this huge system that we call capitalism, there's got to be within the people who are participating in it some kind of motive, some sort of intent that has them do economic activity, this chugga-chugga train, in a particular way. And so what, in addition to that kind of questioning of where are the, literally, where's the spirit of capitalism, Weber is also looking at the very, very curious historical point, which is that up until about the 1500s, so this is Western Europe, Roman Catholic Church is the dominant kind of one church of Europe at this time. So up until around 1500, up until the Protestant Reformation, let me get back to that. In religious teaching, usury was a sin. Now you may have never heard of usury, but it was a big time sin, U-S-U-R-Y, which is the lending of money to make money was considered a sin. This is traced all the way back to the actual, to biblical text, right? And so for 1500 years in Western Europe. Now that's a problem, because if you know anything about capitalism, particularly if you've been paying attention in the last 3 years of our own economy, you know that interest, the ability to make money off of money, to be able to charge interest, is actually one of the important aspects of capitalism. So Weber kind of asks a very curious question, which is, when did a change in this real important teaching called usury is sin, when did that change occur, and how did that change affect the economic sphere? So this is that classic switchman metaphor, which is he's trying to look for what was the change, what was kind of an idea that developed a different end product, end goal or value of life, which sent economics and politics down a different train track. So no longer down the train track of feudalism or mercantilism, but down this thing that we call capitalism today. So here's his argument in brief. This switch is actually the Protestant Reformation. And what Weber argues is that before the Protestant Reformation, the Roman Catholic Church's teachings on salvation were kind of like a safety blanket. It was everybody pretty much is going to get saved if you do the sacraments of church life. So if you live within kind of the realm of a church community, the church, if you recall, and this is a unique characteristic of the Catholic tradition, claims to be able to help people along a path towards salvation by doing sacraments of church life, so baptism, confirmation, communion, this sort of thing. And so the Roman Catholic Church would claim that they're an organization that is able to help kind of people along this way to salvation, and people have a sense that they're headed to that, and they can trust that they're headed towards salvation. But Weber argues that the Protestant Reformation changes everything, because the Protestant Reformation takes the concern of salvation away from this organization and puts it on the shoulders of individuals themselves. In other words, seems to put this huge kind of anxiety and responsibility on people's shoulders. And even more specifically, John Calvin's interpretation of the Protestant Reformation, now this is all according to Weber, says that he introduces this concept called predestination, in which nobody has any idea who is going to be one of the elect, who's going to be saved at the end of time. And so according to Calvin, there's no way for you to know your status, your salvation status. And so what Weber says is this has a very kind of unintended consequence that happens, which is if you're a believer, if you're a part of John Calvin's church after the Protestant Reformation, and you believe in this idea of predestination, but you realize there's no way to really know if you've been saved. And what's important about Calvin's definition of elected salvation is that before the beginning of the world and time, God had already picked who was going to be saved. So there's nothing you could do in this life to change or to determine whether you're going to be saved or not. And Weber looks and says, that's kind of weird. So if people, as a part of Calvin's church, don't know if they're going to be saved, what they do psychologically, so this is him looking at kind of the motive, the intent of action, is that they want to display in their lives what a good saved person would look like. So I'm a member of Calvin's church, and I believe that there's no way to know if I'm saved, but if I have an idea of what being saved mean, which is kind of good people oriented towards God's will, wanting to do God's work in the world, then here in this life, I may start acting as if I was saved, even if I had no idea if I was. And so Weber says there's a certain ethic that's produced by this idea with this long-term value of kind of being in union with God, being good with God. And the unintended behaviors, the ethic are you work hard. So you work hard, you don't waste your time, you don't waste your energy on frivolous, sinful things. You save up your money, so you don't, when you're making money from whatever it is your business is, you don't just spend it willy-nilly on superfluous things that seem out of line with the sanctity and simplicity of God. And he realizes, or this is Weber's argument, that those very behaviors, that ethic that grows from this idea, creates capitalism.